All right, does anybody have any questions before we start today? I'm actually going to come back to a little bit of that later. Not that particular one, but might do a little PowerPoint to change things up today. Maybe I should start with that. Let's see, here's our sign-in sheet. So let's see, was Jake on? Who's on that doesn't have a camera? I see Zach, Chris, and Caleb. Jake, was that you? You can unmute your microphone and talk.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out my camera right now.
Okay, no problem. Just keep working on it. I just wanted to double check that because I would like to have your camera on. I don't want people to have it off, but if you're having technical difficulties, well,
yeah,
so be it. So see what you can do. Otherwise, if you get into the settings, you can check the camera. So, but that's fine. You can. You're all set. Just wanted to check who it was.
Okay, thanks.
All right, you guys. So. We dabbled into the capital market. And we learned that in our big picture of things, who's the borrower, who's the lender? Everybody and everybody, that's right. So, kind of the first thing that's a little bit unique with this credit market, the capital market, is that households, government, firms, international, everybody is a potential saver or lender. And so that's a little bit different in this. That's what we started off with last time. And so I think I will start off with a little PowerPoint motivation. Hopefully it won't be a boring PowerPoint for you. I want to think about the flow of money. And let's see, PowerPoints. Oh, which one is it again? I think it's this one. Guess I'll find out. Yeah. All right, this will work. Okay, so let me start here. So there's our economy again, our basic resources. And what we want to hone into in Chapter 7 is the capital market. So I just kind of think about a tractor, a big piece of machinery that helps us make other stuff, right? And so we've got all the four buckets maybe captured here in this picture. We got land, labor, capital, and some entrepreneurship, right? Potentially all pictured there. And I want to track how that works in terms of our system. Here's a recap of what we did before with the stocks and flows. Investment was what? Investment, stock variable or flow variable? Hopefully this little spigot thing is supposed to give you a hint. Flow, so that's why the I is on the flow. We have our bucket of capital, so our quantity of machines, right? Our quantity of tractors. We got depreciation. So investment was the purchases of new machines and equipment over the course of the year. That tends to raise our bucket level. Some of them wear out and become obsolete, and so our bucket falls. The net balance gives us our ending capital stock. So we're thinking about how our market system facilitates that. So here's our production process, our specialization into firms, into the production. our goods market, and our factor market. So today we're really focusing in on the factor market with the supply and demand of loanable funds and the purchases of tractors. So those capital equipment is owned by households, and firms may be able to borrow that for the day. Like we can go down to Gherkin Rental here in Ottawa and we can rent a tractor. They've got skid steers and other sorts of equipment, right? So we can kind of rent that. So however we phrase it, there's some sort of payment going back for that in the capital market. And let me skip down to our financial markets. Let's see, did we do this one yet? I think it's worth, let me back up a second. I need to enter into kind of slowly build up to the financial markets, I guess. So we've seen this one before. We brought in the government and thought about the flows of funds. The government's a potential borrower. When did the government become a borrower in a given year? What happened, by definition, that caused them to have to borrow money? They outspent their tax revenue, right? So we get tax revenue from the cash register and the output market. We've got income tax coming in from the resource market. And so they didn't collect enough T to cover their G, right? The government's spending. They spend their money in a variety of ways. Weapons of mass destruction from Guns R Us. We might do the little Robin Hood action and give money to the poor, or give it to the unemployed, or give it to the old. Take from the young, give to the old, that sort of thing. And then we might also be cutting paychecks for the person who scrubs the toilet at the White House, right? So we have to spend money there. We're taking resources, somebody who maybe could be working at a company, but they're working at the White House, scrubbing the toilet. And we got to cut them a paycheck. So all kinds of government spending in the output market, the resource market, and then these transfers that go back and forth. All right. So once we bring the rest of the world in, like we did in chapter 15, they've got their own little island thing going on over here with consumption and investment and government spending and exports. So if we add up the spending, what type of approach was that to measuring GDP? C plus I plus G plus X. Our cigarettes, what type of approach? Expenditure approach. Good, expenditure approach. The other approach was the income approach. Okay, and so finally we get to our big plate of spaghetti, I like to call it. Thinking about putting all these pieces together, we're going to enter the possibility of borrowing. How it kicks off is here with the households. In the previous slides, we said that the households eat and drink all of their income. We didn't allow them to save. So we're going to bring a new channel for their funds from their paycheck, that they can go to Walmart and buy stuff and go to Applebee's for dinner, but they can also save some money. And so they're going to direct part of their money into savings. That brings us up into this new ring called the financial markets. All right, the government can partake in the financial markets if they actually collected more taxes than what they spent. Then there would be savings potentially funding there. And the rest of the world, the United States has been running a deficit, trade deficit, or a trade surplus. What have they been doing the last 30 years? So were they short? Do we have a trade surplus or a trade deficit? Exports versus imports, what do we do more of? Imports, right? So net exports is a negative number because we are importing more than we're exporting. If we flipped our equation goggles on real quick here, we do more of this. This one's bigger than this one, and so it's a negative sign. What we hadn't talked about too much was that if we bought more stuff from the rest of the world, we owe them money. If we bought more than we sold them, that wasn't a fair trade, right? We purchased more stuff from them than what we sold them. How does that work? Well, now we're going to close that gap. Because what goes on is that the rest of the world is effectively loaning money to the United States, or they're kind of investing money in the United States. And one of the large things they buy, as it turns out, is government bonds. So one of the things that's been true in the United States over the years is that the government runs short of taxes and has to borrow. The Chinese say, I'll buy some, I'll buy some. So the Chinese start saving, which they save about 40% of their income on average. What do you think Americans do? You guys think most of us save about 40%? Every $100 we get, we put 40 bucks in the bank and spend 60 bucks?
We spend 140.
Yeah, we go. A lot of us go the opposite direction of 140. Good point, right? So that fraction might be down to 10% for Americans. So the Chinese have been really good at funding Americans' lack of being able to balance their books. So when the government needs money, China ends up buying a large fraction of those government bonds, that borrowing that goes on at the federal level. Okay, so that's what corrects this part here, is that foreign investment kind of comes in, foreign purchases of debt goes on to make this gap up. And that's why there's a flow here up at the top. I've got the rest of the world has imports minus exports. In other words, if I reverse this, that amount is a positive amount coming into the financial markets. And so all of this leads to some borrowing. And last time we identified that businesses overall are net borrowers. So the one thing we're focusing in on here is FB is firm borrowing, the firm being the businesses, business borrowing. So business borrowing takes place from domestic households doing some savings, the government doing some savings, although does this run this direction for the United States? No, it kind of comes this way. So we kind of, in our minds, this can actually suck. There's a instead of a blowing out, that flow is actually coming down this way towards the government. So, and then the same thing with the foreigners, they are funding the savers as well. And so that's how firms borrow in the United States, the demanders for loanable funds. All right, let me pause there for a second. Any questions on our plate of spaghetti so far? Just curious, does this show up for you guys okay? Good, okay. All right, so here's the thing, kind of some food for thought about our gross domestic product. To consume or not to consume, that is the question. So here's Tom again from our island, now that he's got 300 million other people to live on the island with. And each individual is making a decision on how much money to eat versus how much money to save. And so when we put on our equation goggles a little later, it's going to be our disposable income, our income after tax. We can put in the bank and save it, or we consume it. So it's just going to be a simple C plus S. We kind of put it one place or the other. I put it into pizza or I put it into the bank. All right, so let's track what happens in our economy with that flow. If I go to Pizza Village, that money comes through the C channel and ends up coming to Pizza Village, right? So they get $90. They take it, they pay their employees, they pay their pizza sauce distributor, they pay the soda people, they pay their landlord the rent, right? That $90 kind of goes back to households, and then households take that money and go do something else with it. The bank part channels through the S channel here, through savings, and something different happens when it goes through the financial markets. That money transforms itself into a tractor, right? So how does it do that? It allows more funds for firms to borrow to buy the tractor. So at the end of the day, we end up having a tractor. That tractor comes to John Deere or International, I'm not sure what that might be, a International Harvester. Is that the full name, right? So that comes to their company, and then they pay their tire distributors, their laborers, their rent to their landlord for their space. They make all their payments for the tractor, and eventually it channels over to here, to the house, somebody's pocket, and then it goes through the process again. Okay, so what's the difference? In other words, from the grand scheme of things, what happens with GDP? Well, I'd claim kind of nothing today if we think about it in that context, right? We spend $100 on a tractor, or we spend $100 on pizza. It ends up being in somebody's cash register, the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of the year, right? Somebody gets that. We ring it up on GDP, and GDP is the same. So GDP ends up being the same either way from that particular transaction. And even some of the economists that think, well, we got to spend, you know, then the economy will get better. That doesn't really make sense in this context. If money eventually gets to one spot, what we've done is we've chosen a tractor over a piece of pizza is kind of the difference in that respect. So here's the big difference, is that a tractor today means a tractor tomorrow. And that's our economic growth, right? Capital accumulation on our island, we have that tractor. The pizza has long become poop, and it has gone down the toilet and into some place where we don't know where it goes after that, right? The pizza is gone. From our economy, on our island, the pizza just kind of disappears. How long do tractors last? Long time. How old do you think some tractors are? Some of you with some farming background.
We have an old Model A and Model B.
And how old? Give me an age, roughly.
75.
75 years old. So now, because of that decision, we've had a productive piece of capital on our island for 75 years, right? And so that's the types of things that are going on in the capital market. From the big picture, if we are currently consuming at 90% consumption and 10% savings, what would the United States look like tomorrow if that changed to 85% consumption and 15% tractors and capital, right? What would the United States look like tomorrow if we could somehow encourage or change the patterns of consumption versus capital? And so that's a powerful thought. We've got this idea in the United States of freedom, so we don't really want President Obama telling us, no, you have to put 15% of your money away. You have to save 15% of your money, right? So what we're doing is we're just observing kind of market behavior of individual agents pursuing their own self-interest, doing their thing, coming up with this result of this 90-10. Whereas culturally, for some reason in China, they're doing a 60-40 thing. And all of that has long-term implications potentially for economic growth. Okay, questions or comments there? So the wealth of the nation. I got this picture in your notes. This is, I can't remember, 2.9 or something. You don't have these little pizza thing. This is the pizza getting kind of pooped out here, and the tractor persisting on our balance sheet from year to year. The tractor might start to wear out, and eventually it depreciates through death, disposal, and depreciation. So there might eventually wear out, of course. But we have this persistence of capital goods moving through time with us in order to accumulate wealth. Now, we haven't talked that much about wealth, so I want to make sure that you got a clear distinction of that. This is probably an underestimate at this time, but I just kind of did it for conceptual purposes anyway. But this was roughly taken off of the United States situation. What is our household wealth? So if we add up our assets, both real and financial, real stuff would be like the tractor, a car, our houses, right? The value of all the things we own minus all the stuff we owe gives us our net wealth for the nation. Which means if we're thinking about national wealth, this liabilities is only the stuff we owe to China and to other countries if we're thinking about the country's wealth again, right? So the fact that some people owe other people that are American citizens, that might not matter when we're looking at the macroeconomy with the nation's wealth. All right, questions or comments there? All right, there's the tractor saving. Okay, so how does investment get funded? It ends up coming about from these three different sources: private saving, government saving, and foreign saving. Those are the three flows that we had there. And that's how our purchases of capital, the purchase of tractors, gets done. Now, the thing to think about is that if G is bigger than T, what must happen? If this turns out to be negative or increasingly negative, as it's gone in the United States, what must happen? All right, something has to give, right? Something has to give. And it possibly could be on this side of the equal sign as well. If this stays constant, and this stays constant, and this is negative, then we might have less tractors going on too. And so that's what we're going to look at when we get into some of the supply and demand work too. All right, so I just kind of wanted to do that for a little food for thought here. That is it for this here. Well, we might come back to that at a different time. We actually will come back to that at a different time. But first, let's get the loanable funds market. Equation goggle time. Your favorite part. So I want to think about things a little bit different. Different types of savings. Types of saving. So one is personal savings. And the amount of savings that households do is our disposable income minus our consumption. Where YD equals disposable income. This is a new term. Might have been brought up, I guess, in chapter 4, but we're going to kind of highlight it here. Disposable income is income after taxes. So we can write that a couple different ways, but how I want to write it now is think about our gross income minus taxes. So you guys have this done with your paychecks all the time. So this is gross income, and this is a what we might refer to as a lump sum tax. You might see this in some of your problems. Taxes are $100, and so we just say, okay, GDP minus $100 equals some disposable amount of income for consumers. All right, so that's personal savings. Number 2 is business savings. and that is retained profits. So undistributed profits plus pension funds from payroll deductions. So number one, I guess I didn't put number one and number two, but number one and number two together end up being called private savings. So private savings, savings by households and businesses, private savings equals number one plus number two. So we're going to see this come up throughout the upcoming chapters. When we use the word private, we're talking kind of non-government. So non-government. All right, we'll get a little bit of this accounting out of the way, and then we'll mostly be done with some of this. So we wrote it up before. We've got government savings, which would be public savings. Government saving is equal to T minus G. Big T being tax collections, and G being government spending. And that's the same G from our cigarettes. C plus I plus G plus X, that's the G. All right. So, this is the equation part. So first of all, recall our expenditure approach. GDP, Y, equals C plus I plus G plus X. So that's the formula we've been working with since chapter 4, the expenditure approach. Now today, we just introduced a new one here. And we can also write that our households are spending their after-tax income on consumption goods or savings. Disposable income equals consumption plus savings. $90 plus $10 for the saving to the bank. 90 for the pizza, 10 for the bank. So another way to think about that is my gross income as an individual either goes to consumption or savings or to the government through taxes. Oh boy, now I've got you really set up here. Here's one equation. Here's another equation. Since this is kind of almost like the income approach, we're thinking of the income of all the households and how that gets divvied up into these three areas. So, what could we do for fun? We could set them equal to each other, couldn't we? And just kind of see how much fun we have doing that. Let's have a purpose to that first. So this chapter is looking at the amount of investment that's going on versus savings. We're trying to track down that part of the picture. So what I want to do is set equation 1 equal to equation 2. So you can almost visualize it, right? I just take this sucker and I put it over here and solve for I. So I want to think about what are the components that are important for investment. So why don't you guys do that? Set this one equal to this one and solve for I. Be brave, so set 1 equal to 2 and solve for big I, investment. Feel free to talk to your neighbor if you want. Did something like that? Throw the rest of the junk over there. What we're deriving is the same thing I had on the screen a little bit earlier. If we step back and look at this, investment in tractors in the United States has to come from 3 sources. One is private savings, savings of Americans. 2 is potentially savings by government. If I put brackets around that, that's my T minus G. That's government saving. And then finally, 3 is minus X, which we could handle a couple different ways. With that minus X, it's minus exports minus imports, right? Well, that looks like that. If we kind of blow that thing up, minus a minus is a plus, minus exports. So if we flip those 2 things around, we can look at it that way and just say plus imports minus exports, which is the amount of money that foreigners are bringing us because we shorted them on our international trade. And that's it. All of our investment activities are essentially funded by those 3 sources. Okay, questions on that? So let me write, let's kind of write a clean one up here. There, I'll do it here. Just so you got it down in your notes. So investment is equal to savings plus, if we do the M minus the imports minus the exports, plus T minus G, we get domestic savings, foreign savings, and government savings. All right, so most important point kind of driving home is those 3 sources that come in. And now we're going to get back to that supply and demand curve that we started with last time. We kind of laid the foundation. And we used the loanable funds market, the amount of borrowing that's going on, as our springboard for the amount of tractors It's actually not a perfect system because not every tractor gets borrowed, right? So it's kind of a approximation that a large part of tractors gets borrowed. And so in this loanable funds market, we had that, I'll write it out here again, the real interest rate, which we were using a little r. And we have a supply of loanable funds, upward sloping, downward sloping, demand for loanable funds. The demanders, the net demanders were who? Who's demanding funds? Who's our borrowers on average? Households or businesses? Businesses, right? So businesses are kind of down here. Mentally, you can think about that. If the government's running a deficit like ours has done, they're going to be demanding some funds. We'll get to that topic here in a little bit. And then we've got the supply of loanable funds coming to us from the households. Okay. The interaction of these two things gives us some equilibrium rate of interest and some amount of funds being exchanged. They're trading, there's a certain volume of trade in financial markets that gives us that equilibrium amount of funds being traded. Okay, so let's write some of this down here, what the DLF and SLF are. So the demand for loanable funds. Businesses desire more funds. Businesses desire more funds, meaning they'd like to increase their investment when it costs less to do so. Meaning when interest rates are cheap. What other factors play into businesses' thoughts on whether they should go into debt to buy a new combine? What are some other things that factor into that decision besides low interest rates? Hey, interest rates are cheap. It seems this would be a good time to maybe get a tractor. What else goes into that thought process?
Future profit.
Future profit, right? So how much am I going to make off this combine? What do I think is going to happen in the economy? How do corn markets look, right? So we really can kind of lump a lot of other issues into one thing that we'll call expected profits. So businesses would like more funds when it costs less to do so for a given a level of expected profits. Expected profits. Underline the word expected. Future. I'm thinking about doing this today. Interest rates are cheap, but what are my expected profits? I have expected cost, I got expected revenues, all kinds of things thinking about the profitability of whether I should do it or not. Okay. How about the supply of loanable funds? The SLF. If we come back to this picture, what I'm trying to describe is, why does it look the way it looks? Why is the supply of loanable funds upward sloping? And what does that mean? So when interest rates are low, then individual savers are going to save less, right? The amount that they offer, that they bring to the table in forms of saving is less. When the interest rates are high, the rate that they can get on their money is high. If we start putting maybe a few numbers here at 2%, 4%, and then maybe this jumps up to, let's see, we got 8, I don't know, 7%, then they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to bring a lot of money to the table, right? So that's the thought process that we're thinking about in the supply of loanable funds for the households. So the lower the real interest rate is, the lower R is, the lower is the opportunity cost. There's a word we haven't talked about for a while. The lower is the opportunity cost of consumption. The lower the real interest rate is, the lower is the opportunity cost of consumption. Let me pause there for a second, because that's a little bit weird. So if interest rates are low, the lower the interest rate is, the lower is the opportunity cost of consumption. What is that saying? What's the trade-off that this is identifying for the household? Economists are big on these trade-offs. That's why opportunity cost is right up there with the top 3 of all economic principles.
It's giving us the next best alternative. So if the interest rates are lower, then if that's your next best alternative, then it's better to consume.
Okay. So in terms of today, what this is bringing up is kind of a time element, right? Because when we think about savings, why are you guys saving money? Just kind of start to peel the onion back. When you're saving, maybe for retirement or something else, why are you saving money?
It's like investing in yourself.
Yeah, are you investing in yourself? Why are you saving money? This is we sometimes, a lot of times, this is kind of fascinating area of behavioral economics. We kind of ask ourselves, well, why am I doing that? Crap, I don't know, I never thought about it. But if we save money today, why are we doing it? What's our motivation?
To buy something in the future.
For the future.
For the future, future what?
Purchase.
Consumption, future purchases. So that's kind of a weird way of thinking about, well, I'm just saving because of retirement. You know, Russ, we got a 65 comes before you know it, and we got to retire. Well, why are you doing that? It's so that you can consume in the future. So the economist, in kind of a perverse way, is thinking about consumption all the time. It's current consumption being traded for future consumption, right? Current consumption and future consumption, we're just thinking about which one do I want to do. If I give up consumption today, then I hope that I can consume more in the future through that interest rate that I earn on my money, right? So it might be a good thing to do, but it's a trade-off of current consumption and future consumption. It's bringing in this time element in the choices that we make. So when interest rates are cheap, you're kind of like, well, that sucks. I'd rather have a chicken wing and a beer if you're only going to give me 2%. I'll rather have that today rather than tuck it away for tomorrow. But as you start to raise the interest rate, you're like, I don't need that chicken wing that bad. I'm going to jump on some of this 7% action, this 10% action. We can make the numbers more obnoxious and it becomes more alluring, right? If we say, what if I give you a 50% return? Are you going to go hungry tonight maybe so that you can put some money in the bank? Yeah, right? So you start to see when we start to get a little more obnoxious with it, it's easier to understand this trade-off that we're facing.
So it's like
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of tying back to the big picture of the tractor analogy of how we can have more future growth if we have more tractors today rather than pizza and beer. Right? So yes, it does tie into economic growth with the accumulation over time. Okay, other comments or questions? So the lower the real interest rate, the lower the opportunity cost of consumption, and therefore we consume more and save less. Given, there's that given word again. Remember with these economic models, we're kind of immediately thinking, well, under what assumptions, Russ? That's the key thing. What are we assuming? If interest rates are low, we're going to save less. But what are some other factors that go into your decision of how much to save? What are some things that we think about outside of just the interest rate alone? Our income, right? So our current income or our expected income? Expected income. So that's going to be one of the things we're thinking about here is maybe you guys are thinking the same thing too. Why are you taking on student loans? That's dumb. How are you going to pay those back? After you get out of here, are you going to stay at McDonald's for the rest of your life? Or are you expecting more income than $8 an hour when you have your Ottawa University degree? All right? How many people are expecting more than McDonald's pay when you get your Ottawa University degree? Good, good. So that mentality of a higher expected future income changes your behavior today on how much you're saving. You're not saving a lot of money right now. In fact, some of you are upside down and you're borrowing because of your expected future income. Kind of independent, perhaps, of the interest rates. So one of those things we're going to consume more and save less that we need to hold constant given our expected future income. Our expected future income, which we could do a little notation here of y raised to the e power, but the e is really just expected, so that's just a notation thing. Expected future income, and we'll kind of continue to use that notation in different ways through the semester as well. Okay, so given our expected future income, our disposable income, so comma, disposable income, so it's actually both, right? So our disposable income was that little YD thing, was income after taxes. And our wealth. So three things. How would you describe the difference between your income and wealth? If you're high income, are you wealthy? Not always. So, how do you decide? What's the difference between wealth and income? Which one's the flow variable? Which one's the stock variable? Oh, not that game again. Wealth is stock. Good. So wealth is stock. The accumulation of assets, that little cascading waterfall of my bucket of wealth. How do I become wealthy over time? Well, at any point in time, I can add up all of the things I owe, minus own, minus all the things I owe, assets minus liabilities. And if I have a little $1 million thing at the end, what do Americans call that? You're a millionaire. So if you are, that's when we start talking wealth, right? If assets minus liabilities ends up being $1 million for yourself, you are a millionaire. So your level of wealth could play a role in that. If we take two people who are each making $50,000 a year, but one has $1 million in net worth, one's a millionaire, the other one lives paycheck to paycheck on their $50,000, may they behave differently in their savings behavior? Yes, right? So that's the wealth effect. So we'll get to that on how that might change the parameters over here. Okay. So let's I hate not being running dual exhaust. It's so inefficient. Gotta have dualies. All right. So the next thing we got to look at is shifters. So we've kind of identified the pieces. We've got the quantity of loanable funds. Remember, this is dollars, right? So loanable funds is the amount of money that was traded over that year. So we've got a quantity of loanable funds that were exchanged at different interest rates. That tees us up for the loanable funds market. So then, what makes this stuff shift? So DLF shifters. One is, and our only one that we're going to do for this one, expected profits. So, it's time to pull out the golf club. Been waiting for this for a while. Sorry, you guys that are in the front row, this could get a little dangerous. So, if there's an increase in expected profits, what happens in the loanable funds market? Shifts to the right, right? So we can think about that. What happens to interest rates? They go up. They were at 4%, and now there's going to be upward pressure on interest rates, and more funds are going to be exchanged, right? So we're going to come to rest at a new quantity of loanable funds and a new interest rate. So an increase in expected profits moves this direction. Of course, if we expect that the economy is going to go in the crapper and profits are going to go down, we move the other direction, right? So that is our demand shifter with expected profits. So an increase in expected profit leads to an increase in the demand for loanable funds. Again, the notation that I use, an up arrow means a shift to the right. When you look at this graphically, another way to think about it is this. At 7% interest, businesses used to want to borrow this much funds. Now that they expect more profits, they'd like to have this many. At this percent, they used to want this much, now they want this much. At 4%, they used to want this much, now they want this much. At 2%, they used to want this much, now they want this much. And so, at higher expected profits, they demand more loanable funds at all interest rates. And if we keep telling ourselves that story, we start getting a collection of points that are so close together that they eventually resemble a line. And so I like to think about these functions in two-dimensional graphing space as a collection of points, because it's a good mental reminder for you that you need to be thinking about the two dimensions that are associated with it. The quantity of loanable funds in this case, and the real interest rate. That increase causes interest rates to climb and loanable funds to increase. All right, questions on that one? Now, Jeff, does this come close to your question you had a little bit on relating graph to schedule or not?
I mean, that's the graph that would go with the schedule. I just don't understand how to solve using just the schedule.
Okay.
It seems to me like in those questions, there's a piece of information that we don't have.
Okay, maybe I'll. Yeah, let me take a look at this one a little closer. And there might be, because there's something in the words up here, so see me after class and I'll take a look at it. I guess what I will say about it is that this is a problem Jeff brought in from, what do we got here, week 3, number 7.3. Oh, this was in the study plan. So this is one of the study plan problems. So here's the schedule goggles, right? Just the schedule of numbers. That's this. So we got to be able to have graphing goggles on or schedule goggles depending on the type of problem. And
that one covers, most of them cover, this is going into like government deficit.
yeah, and we're still going to talk a little bit more about that here yet to come. But with the schedules, something's going on. I haven't read the whole problem, but normally where these two are equal at different interest rates, where these two are equal ends up finding your equilibrium level. So wherever those are on the schedule. But something's not catching my eye here because I think there's more going on with the problem. Okay, so that's expected profits. That's all we have for our DLF shifters. The supply shifters, supply of loanable funds. These tie back to our households. And the first one I want to look at is disposable income. If there is an increase in after-tax income, what is going to happen with our savers? Do you think that'll tend to increase savings or decrease savings? Decrease? Increase? Don't want to spend? Spend all the extra? So we got more after-tax income. What do we want to buy more of? Let's say you guys got a nice little pay raise. Maybe it's your first job. What are you going to buy when you go to the grocery store with your new income that you got, your increase in your disposable income? What are you buying? Some what? What stuff? What do you like? Oreos, right? So you might, have you been buying the generic brand a little bit once in a while? Because when you're in college, you might have to stretch a dime, or is that there's no way you're buying it? My son would be with you, by the way. We went to Aldi and they had the $1.39 versus the Oreo that was $3 or something. I'm like, well, we got to try it. And I tasted them. I'm like, well, this is a good substitute. We got to talk about substitutability of consumption goods and all the fun stories that you have when you have an economist dad. And so he took it and said, this is gross. I'm not going to eat it. So he literally did not even eat the rest of the stupid bag. And he's not even a picky eater at all. He eats all kinds of stuff. But he's like you. There's not a substitute available apparently to him for the True Blue Oreo cookie. All right, so Oreos. What else are you buying? Big fat paycheck, big fat pay raise. What are you buying when you go to the store? Pizza. Bigger pay raise. Steak. T-bone, ribeye, right? Crab legs. I'm a king crab leg person. I like those big giant ones. They're so freaking expensive. I can't justify buying them very often, but man, when you pull out a piece of leg meat and it's got a 2-inch diameter, life is good. Very good. So if you are a crab leg eater and you haven't had the big spiky king crab leg, you can get them at Sam's Club or Costco. I mean, they have them at other grocery stores, but you always see them on display there. Those are the best. That's like my favorite. So you end up buying more stuff. Now, the question is, thinking about those goods that you like, do you want to buy some more of that stuff next year too? Do you think that king crab leg or that steak, those Oreos, are going to be appealing next week, next month, next year? So not only will you increase current consumption with your pay raise, but you're also going to want to increase future consumption. Now, you still might spend 90% of it, right? So the large chunk of it will come in consumption, but that increase in disposable income should lead to an increase in the supply of loanable funds. Now, the reason that's coming about here is that disposable income is either consumed or saved. This is the equation we put up before. So that if this is disposable income in 2014, that 2014 was consumed and it was saved. In the macro picture, this might be for the United States 90%, 10%, which means if I get a bump in pay of $100, I spend 90 of it on pizza, 10 bucks I throw in the bank, right? So both of them go up is the point. It's not a trade-off between the two. And so as my disposable income goes up, I tend to save more, holding all of the things constant, which puts what direction on interest rates? They start to fall, right? So downward pressure on interest rates, an increase of loanable funds from our tractor people, from our big picture of the island. If there's an increase in savings, do we have more tractors or less tractors? More loanable funds. So I want you to start equating that this horizontal axis with loanable funds. It's one thing to talk about dollars, but we're also kind of measuring the level of investment in capital. The amount of capital, physical machines, is going up. So that's a good thing. Okay, number 2. I think I'll try to squeeze this down here for now. Number 2 is our wealth. So, what happens to our savings of our income when our wealth goes up? So just kind of pause before you jump to conclusions here and think about that. So as you become more wealthy, you're a millionaire, you're a multimillionaire, maybe you're a homeowner with a $200,000 house and you got $100,000 worth of debt. And real estate prices tend to keep going up and up, so your $200,000 house next year is expected to be worth $210,000. And of course your debt's going down as you pay your debt, so you had $100,000 of wealth in 2014, and now in 2015 your wealth from your house, your net worth of your house, your equity in your house is up to $110,000. So it's going from $100,000 to $110,000 to $120,000 to $130,000 to $160,000. As your wealth increases, how does that impact the amount of money you tuck away from your paycheck? Your savings from your income, which is a flow variable. Do you tend to do more savings or less? Less, that's right. So this one's a little bit counterintuitive, I think, that as we acquire more wealth, or as our wealth grows, in a sense, it's kind of like savings. I'm putting the quotes up here because us Americans tend to slosh that word around. Economists are a little more picky with their words because savings in this context is what you're doing with your flow variable, what you're doing with your paycheck. Saving is a flow variable. If you put that saving into a bank and now you have an account that grows from $10,000 to $12,000, holding all other things constant, your wealth has grown. Your savings account has grown. Right? Gets a little confusing keeping wealth and saving in this context, the flow variable, separate. All right, so let me write that out here. So an increase in wealth leads to a decrease in the supply of loanable funds. So remember, this is the stock variable at a point in time. Our behavior based off of our income is this thing. This is our flow of savings. So as we become wealthier, we might tend to turn down the spigot a little bit, turn down the flow of how much we're contributing, holding all of the things constant. So the example is the housing bubble that maybe some of you got affected by more than others. Maybe some of your parents lost their job, lost their house, had to declare bankruptcy. There's a lot of that type of stuff going on during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, 2010. It might have taken a while for all of the negative effects to hit. But after economists look back at things, they think this was a big deal. Is that people had this false sense of security that they were wealthy because their house price was going up. And they're like, oh, I don't need to save. Sure would be fun to go down to Jamaica. And so we book a trip to Jamaica, we increase our consumption and sacrifice our savings. We do a little up arrow here and a little down arrow here on each paycheck, right? We start to devote a little bit more, a little bit less to future consumption and more to current consumption because of our false sense of security that we had from our wealth. And so that was a large part of the story of why Americans, even over the last 20 to 30 years, have not been very good savers. In part, that it's argued that that's due to this false sense of wealth that they have from housing prices going up, maybe more than what's sustainable long term. So example, housing bubble, households perceived more wealth in their house. And therefore decreased their saving. Took trip to Jamaica instead of tucking it away. And of course they bought the king crab legs too, and the steak, and all kinds of stuff that brought them a little more pleasure than putting it into some other vehicle that might help them out later. All right, questions or comments on that one? All right, lastly, number 3 is our expected future income. If you have an increase in expected future income, what happens to your savings today, the supply of loanable funds? Left or right? Left, right? That's you guys again. So if you're expecting higher income tomorrow, why save today? I can even go into debt and I'll just pay it back with higher future wages or whatever. So that'll lead to a decrease in supply of loanable funds. Okay. So, the way a lot of problems, of course, you guys have to be pretty comfortable with the toolbox. And then when you approach a problem on the test or homework, it's going to say, suppose that there is a change in wealth or whatever, one of these changes, what's the impact on the market? And we have to kind of know the direction where we think interest rates and quantity loanable funds will head. All right, questions there? All right. So our next topic is thinking about the government's involvement, which is always fun. How does the government work in this picture? So let's draw what I call a home base. I might refer to this home base in the loanable funds market. So in other words, on a short answer problem for an exam that you might see, you should be able to regurgitate this from memory without a problem. It's not that hard.